The evening air carried the sound of people returning from their day's work, voices rising and falling like music in the background. In the middle of Lagos, where life pressed hard on everyone, there lived a man named Chike. People only knew him as a quiet, simple fellow who never seemed to have much. His shirts were always plain, his shoes worn, and he walked with the kind of calm that made no one think he had anything special. Yet behind that ordinary face was a truth no one could have guessed. Chike was a billionaire. He had inherited his father's empire, companies spread across different cities, and investments that quietly multiplied without end. But money had become a strange burden for him. Each smile he received, every word of kindness spoken to him, left him questioning if it was real or if it had been bought by the weight of his name. He longed to know the truth, who would see him, not his wealth, and stay by his side without expecting anything in return. That hunger for truth was what made him strip himself of every sign of riches and step into a world where no one would suspect him. Chike moved into a small compound where families lived close enough that you could hear their laughter and quarrels through the walls. He rented a tiny room at the back, with nothing more than a mattress, a chair, and a flickering bulb that sometimes left him in darkness. People in the compound thought he was just another young man trying to survive the endless hustle of Lagos. He greeted everyone politely, carried his own water from the tap, and even joined in sweeping the front yard with the others. Nobody had the faintest idea that the man who bent low to scrub the shared bathroom floor had drivers and chefs waiting in silence elsewhere. It was here that he began to watch, quietly, who truly lived with an honest heart. Some neighbors gossiped endlessly, some only came close when they needed favors, and some kept their distance, suspicious of anyone new. But there were a few faces that shone differently. Among them was Ada, a woman who sold roasted corn by the roadside. Her voice was warm when she spoke, and she had the habit of sharing what little she had with children who came around hungry. Chike noticed how she gave without making noise about it, without expecting anything in return. One evening, the sky painted itself in orange as the day began to fold, and Chike found himself at her stall. He bought one cob of corn and sat quietly on the wooden bench beside her. They spoke like two strangers who had nothing to hide, their laughter mixing with the sound of passing motorcycles. She asked him about his work, and he told her simply that he was trying to make ends meet. She looked at him with kind eyes and said, "At least you're trying, that's what matters." That night, for the first time in a long while, Chike felt seen as a man, not as a bank account. As the days turned into weeks, their conversations grew deeper. She told him about her struggles, how she had dropped out of school to take care of her younger siblings, how every cob of corn she sold kept the roof above their heads. She spoke with honesty, never pretending to have more than she did. Chike listened, storing every word in his heart. For him, her sincerity was like water in a desert. But he was not just watching Ada. The compound itself was a stage, and each person played their role. Some borrowed money from him and never returned it. Some treated him like a nobody, pushing past him without care. And then there were the moments when he was tested, like the day his worn slippers tore, and everyone laughed except Ada, who quietly handed him hers and walked barefoot. Each scene carved something into his chest. Chike was beginning to see the truth about people, the truth about love, the truth about loyalty. What he didn't know was that this journey he had chosen would lead him to discoveries that would shake him, challenge him, and reveal sides of people he never imagined. The story had only begun, but already, Chike was no longer the man who stepped down from his high tower of wealth. He was a man learning, feeling, and slowly uncovering who in his world was real, and who only wore masks. Chike had grown used to the rhythm of life in the compound. The mornings came with the sound of children running across the dusty yard, their bare feet beating the earth as mothers called after them. Roosters crowed, not caring whether anyone wanted more sleep, and the tap outside was always busy with people queuing for water, buckets clanging against the ground. Chike joined in quietly, carrying his small plastic bucket like everyone else. To the neighbors, he was just another man doing his best to survive, blending so well into their world that no one looked twice at him. But behind those plain shirts and quiet eyes, He carried questions that weighed heavily on him. Who would stand beside him if his wealth was stripped away forever? Who would still laugh with him if there was nothing to gain? He studied people carefully, as though every action they made was a clue to the puzzle he wanted to solve. The first to reveal themselves were his two closest neighbors, Cunnell and Beesie, a couple who argued as often as they smiled. Cunnell worked at a car wash down the street, while Beesie sold small sachets of pure water. At first, they welcomed Chike warmly, bringing him food once in a while. But when he could not repay their kindness with anything grander than a simple thank you, their attitude began to shift. The food stopped coming, and Cunnell's voice became sharp whenever Chike borrowed matches or asked to use their kerosene stove. It was as if they had expected him to give back more than friendship, and when he did not, the warmth died. There was also Mama Uche, the landlady, who pretended to be motherly but was quick to snap when rent was delayed by a single day. She often shouted across the yard about who owed what, making sure the entire compound heard. Chike always paid on time, but he noticed how she treated those who struggled. She spoke kindly only when she wanted something, and her smiles disappeared once her needs were met. Watching her made Chike think about all the board members and family friends who once praised him as generous but vanished when he did not sign checks fast enough. It was the same pattern, just painted differently. In the midst of this, Ada's presence became like a steady light. Every evening, when her stall filled the air with the smell of roasted corn, Chike found himself wandering there, as though pulled by something stronger than hunger. They sat together on the wooden bench, sharing stories that had no price tag. Sometimes, she laughed so hard her head tilted back, and he found himself laughing too, forgetting the weight of his secret. Other times, her words carried the heaviness of her struggles, but she told them without bitterness, with a strength that humbled him. One night, the sky threatened rain, clouds heavy and dark, the kind of night when most people stayed indoors. But Chike still walked to Ada's stall, and he found her trying to pack up quickly before the downpour. The fire crackled weakly as the wind picked up. Without hesitation, he helped her cover the roasting stand, his hands blackened with soot. Together, they dragged her wooden table inside her small shop. When the rain finally fell, heavy and merciless, they stood side by side in the cramped space, laughing at how wet they had become. For Chike, it was a simple moment, but it struck deeper than anything else. There was no wealth between them, no grand setting, no fine clothes, just two people, wet from the rain, sharing laughter that needed nothing more. But not everyone looked at Chike with kindness. Some of the compound dwellers began to mock him openly. One afternoon, when his slippers tore again and he walked carefully with the straps barely holding, two young men sitting under the mango tree laughed loudly, calling him Mr. Broke Man. They made jokes about how he always ate corn from Ada's stall but never seemed to afford anything better. Ada, overhearing, frowned deeply. Later, she told him, "Don't mind them. People will always talk, but what matters is how you carry yourself." Her words soothed him, but deep inside, Chike wondered if her kindness would last once she learned who he really was. Days grew into weeks, and Chike continued to test the hearts around him. There was another woman in the compound, Sade, who was known for her beauty and sharp tongue. She always wore bright clothes and spoke loudly so everyone noticed her. Sade began paying unusual attention to Chike, asking him questions about where he worked, why he didn't dress better, and if he had plans to make it big. At first, she laughed at him with others, but when she noticed how calm and polite he remained, her tone shifted. She began offering him food, sometimes insisting he eat at her place. But Chike saw through her quickly. Her kindness came with probing eyes, as though she were searching for hidden treasure in him. He knew that if she ever discovered the truth, her affection would turn into desperate pursuit. Every night, when the compound quieted and children finally slept, Chike lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. He thought about his father, a man who had always warned him, "Wealth will draw both angels and wolves. If you want to know who truly loves you, strip yourself bare and see who remains." Chike finally understood the weight of those words. He was living them now, and every day revealed another side of people. One Sunday morning, Ada surprised him. She invited him to join her and her siblings for church. He almost said no, worried that being close to her family might pull him deeper into feelings he wasn't ready to face, but something in her eyes made him agree. At the church, he watched her sing with her siblings, her voice clear and honest. There was no pretense, no show, just pure devotion. The sight moved him more than he expected. After the service, her younger brother tugged at his hand and asked if he would come home for lunch. Sitting in their small home later that day, eating rice that had more water than stew, Chaik felt something he had not felt in years: family. But as his bond with Ada grew, so did the whispers around the compound. Some neighbors teased that he was chasing her because she was the only one who tolerated his poverty. Others warned Ada directly, telling her not to waste time on a man who couldn't even afford good clothes. She always brushed them off, saying quietly, "I know what I see." Yet Chaik wondered, when the truth came out, would she still say the same? In that small compound in Lagos, surrounded by suspicion, gossip, laughter, and struggle, Chaik was slowly discovering more about people than money had ever taught him. Each day tested his patience, each interaction unmasked another truth. And while he had begun this journey to uncover who would stay with him in poverty, he was slowly realizing that he might also uncover who he truly was when stripped of everything else. The story of his heart, his secret, and the people around him was only beginning to unfold, and the road ahead promised lessons he could never have imagined. The morning sun crept into the compound, stretching shadows across the dusty ground where children had already begun their games. Chaik sat quietly outside his small room, watching the life around him. Women balanced bowls of vegetables on their heads, men argued about football matches, and radios blared the news in uneven bursts. He had learned to blend in so completely that even those who had once stared at him with curiosity now barely noticed him. He was simply Chaik, the man with patched shirts and broken slippers. But inside his heart, storms were brewing. He could no longer deny how much Ada had begun to matter to him. Each evening at her corn stall, each laugh they shared, each story she told carved a place for her in his world. He hadn't planned for this. His intention had only been to test hearts, to unmask truth. Yet here he was, drawn to a woman who didn't even know his real name, his real story, or the depth of what he carried. That week, something happened in the compound that tested everyone. The water tap outside, the one the whole compound relied on, broke down. Suddenly, the struggle for water became the biggest problem. People began fighting, accusing each other of wasting water. Children cried as buckets sat empty. Mema Uche, the landlady, refused to fix it immediately, saying she had no money. Everyone groaned, knowing she always found ways to avoid spending her own. Chaik watched silently as frustration grew. He could have solved it in one phone call, sent workers to repair the tap in an hour. But he held himself back. He wanted to see who would rise when things grew hard. That evening, while others argued, Ada carried her buckets far down the street to fetch water and returned, shoulders wet from the heavy load. She noticed Chaik standing nearby and, without hesitation, handed him a full bucket before carrying her own inside. "You need this more than me," she said, her voice firm. Chaik's chest tightened. She had so little, yet she still gave. Days later, the water problem worsened. The compound felt divided, neighbors hoarded their buckets, people whispered about who wasn't helping, and tempers flared. On the third day, Ada surprised everyone by calling some of the young men together. She suggested pooling their money to at least get a temporary fix done. At first, no one listened, brushing her aside. But she stood her ground. "We all need this. If we keep waiting, nothing will change," she said. Slowly, others agreed, and by evening, a local plumber had been brought to look at the tap. Chaik contributed a little, enough to look believable, not enough to reveal himself. But he never forgot that it was Ada who had sparked the action. She didn't wait for rescue. She didn't complain endlessly. She stepped forward when it mattered. That night, as he sat on his mattress, the sound of dripping water finally restored, Chaik thought about how many times people in his wealthy world had failed him when small sacrifices were needed. He had known men who smiled in his presence yet disappeared when loyalty was tested. Ada's strength reminded him of what he had lost in that world, genuine people who acted without calculation. Still, as his feelings grew, so did his fears. He lay awake, asking himself hard questions. What if Ada discovered his secret? Would she feel betrayed? Would she believe he had only played with her life? Would she walk away, unable to forgive the lie? The thought twisted inside him like a knife. But deeper than fear was another truth: he wanted her to stay not because of his money, but because of who he was beneath it. That was the battle inside him every day. Meanwhile, Sade, the woman who loved to show off, kept trying to get closer. She had noticed how often Chaik sat at Ada's stall, and jealousy burned in her eyes. She began bringing Chaik food again, this time cooked and wrapped neatly, insisting he take it. One evening, she even said loudly, "Why waste your time with someone selling corn by the roadside when you can be with a real woman?" Her voice carried across the yard, and the whole compound turned to watch. Chaik felt heat rise in his chest, but before he could respond, Ada calmly looked at Sade and said, "At least I sell something with my hands. Better than mocking someone else while offering nothing." The compound fell silent, then erupted in laughter. Sade's face tightened, and she stormed off, muttering insults. Chaik's respect for Ada deepened. She didn't need to scream. Her dignity spoke louder than anger ever could. As the days passed, more challenges tested the compound. One night, a thief sneaked in and stole some clothes hung out to dry. Panic spread, and the neighbors accused one another. Fingers pointed at Kunal, whose attitude had grown sharper toward everyone. He shouted back, insisting he had nothing to do with it. The tension was so thick that fights nearly broke out. In the middle of it, Chaik noticed Ada's calm voice again. She gathered the women together, reminding them that division would only make the thief's job easier. She suggested they begin locking the compound gate earlier, watching out for one another instead of tearing themselves apart. The way she handled the situation reminded Chaik of his own board meetings, where powerful men argued endlessly until someone with vision spoke sense. But this was no polished boardroom. This was a woman with nothing but courage, guiding her neighbors. That night, when they sat together at her stall, Chaik asked quietly, "Why do you always try to fix things? You don't get tired?" Ada smiled faintly, turning the roasting corn over the fire. "If we don't take care of each other, who will? Life is already hard enough. At least here, we should be able to breathe." Her words stayed with him long after he left. One weekend, Chaik decided to test something else. He told Ada he had been offered a small job cleaning at a nearby shop, but the pay was barely enough. He wanted to see how she would react. Would she push him to chase more, to seek money desperately, or would she accept him as he was? Ada looked at him with quiet eyes and said, "At least it's honest work. Don't be ashamed of it. What matters is how you carry yourself." She even offered to bring him food when he worked late. The compound never slept without drama. Gossip about Chaik and Ada grew louder. Some laughed behind their backs, calling them the poor couple. Others pitied Ada, saying she deserved a man who could provide more. Chaik endured it all silently, but every insult made him wonder how strong her loyalty truly was. Yet each time, Ada brushed it off. "Let them talk," she told him one evening. "Words can't break us unless we let them." Still, beneath the calm surface, something new was brewing. Rumors had begun spreading outside the compound. Somewhere, someone had recognized Chaik despite his plain clothes. A driver who once worked in his company had seen him near the market and whispered to others. It was only a matter of time before the secret he had carefully hidden would start to unravel. But for now, Chaik sat under the dim compound light, listening to the sound of Ada's laughter drifting from her stall, and he knew one thing for sure: his heart had already chosen. The question that haunted him was whether hers would remain when the truth finally stepped into the open. The compound had begun to take on a new rhythm, The kind of rhythm that only grows when people live too close to one another, where secrets and stories weave into a single noisy fabric. Every evening, after the sun slid low and the air cooled just enough to breathe, people sat outside their doors, trading gossip, laughter, or complaints about the price of food. Chaik had become part of this rhythm, no longer the stranger but the quiet man everyone thought they understood. They believed he was one of them, just another man trying to survive the daily grind. But beneath that surface, he carried the weight of two worlds. In one world, he was the billionaire heir, with wealth that could rebuild entire streets. In the other, he was a poor tenant with a mattress too thin to cushion his back and clothes too worn to impress anyone. It was inside this tension that his feelings for Ada continued to grow, pushing him deeper into a conflict he had not prepared for. It was on a Friday evening that the first real storm between them began to brew. The compound was buzzing with activity, children racing about, mothers pounding yam in wooden mortars, and radios shouting political debates into the air. Chaik sat at Ada's stall as he often did, watching her skillfully roast corn while chatting with customers. Then Sade, still burning from the humiliation of the other week, walked over. She had painted her lips bright red and carried herself with the confidence of someone who wanted the whole world to look. She leaned against the wooden stall and sneered. "Ada, don't you get tired? Every day you sell this same thing, and for what? To feed a man who can't even buy his own food?" The words cut through the air sharply. Some neighbors nearby paused, pretending not to listen but clearly hanging on to every syllable. Chaik felt heat rise in his chest, but before he could speak, Ada turned to her, her voice steady. "At least what I do is honest. I don't use my mouth to destroy people while pretending to be better than them." The stall grew silent for a moment, the only sound the crackle of roasting corn. Sade's face twisted, and she stormed off, muttering that Ada was wasting her youth on a man who would never give her anything. When she left, Ada turned back to her work as if nothing had happened. But Chaik sat quietly, shaken. Her defense had been strong, yet the insult had struck something deep inside him. He wasn't really the poor man Sade mocked, but for Ada, that was the man she was standing by. The thought made his heart heavy. Would she stand so firmly if she knew the truth? Later that night, as the compound grew quiet, Chaik lay awake on his mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling. His mind raced. He thought about Ada's words, about Sade's insult, about the secret he still carried. Every day that passed, the secret grew heavier. He wanted Ada to see him, but he also feared that revealing himself would break everything they had built. The next morning brought another test. Ada's younger brother, Emeka, came running into the compound, tears streaming down his face. He had been chased from school for not paying his fees. Ada rushed to comfort him, holding him tightly while he cried. Chaik stood a few steps away, watching the pain on her face as she tried to reassure her brother. That evening, as they sat together, Ada sighed deeply. "Sometimes I wish I could do more for them. Emeka is so smart, but money always gets in the way. I don't mind sacrificing, but it hurts to see him suffer." Chaik's chest ached. He wanted to pull out his phone, transfer more than enough to cover years of schooling, and tell her she never had to worry again. But he held himself back. If he gave her that now, would it be Chaik the poor man she loved, or Chaik the billionaire who could fix everything? Instead, he quietly promised himself that if she remained by his side till the end, he would make sure she never cried over money again. In the following weeks, Chaik noticed that some neighbors began to distance themselves further. The compound was a place where people's kindness often ended when there was no benefit to be gained. When he could not contribute more than small coins during group expenses, some rolled their eyes. When he joined in conversations, a few ignored him, speaking over him as though his words had no weight. He observed it all silently, storing each moment in his heart. He knew too well how wealth had once disguised these attitudes, how smiles could be bought. Now, stripped bare, he was seeing the raw truth. Yet through all this, Ada remained steady. One evening, when Chaik confessed to her that he sometimes felt invisible in the compound, she looked him straight in the eyes and said, You don't need to prove yourself to anyone here. People will only see what they want to see. But I see you, and that's enough for me." Those words wrapped around his heart like a shield. But the calm didn't last long. Rumors had begun to spread beyond the compound. A man at the market, an old driver who once worked for Chaik's family, had seen him one day buying vegetables. Though Chaik had worn the plainest clothes, the man's eyes had lingered on him too long, as if trying to place a memory. By the following week, whispers reached the compound that Chaik wasn't who he seemed. It started subtly. Mama Uche, the landlady, asked him one morning, "Are you sure you don't have some big family somewhere? The way you carry yourself is not like someone who has nothing." Her tone was light, almost joking, but her eyes were sharp. Others began looking at him differently, suspicion growing like a shadow. Chaik tried to ignore it, but the pressure mounted. He could feel the net closing in. One careless word, one slip, and his truth would spill into the open. He wasn't ready, not yet. He needed more time. But Ada was beginning to notice his unease. One evening, as they sat at her stall, she asked softly, "Chaik, is there something you're not telling me? Sometimes it feels like you're holding back, like there's a part of you I don't know." Her question pierced him. He looked into her eyes, the firelight flickering against her face, and his throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to say, "I am not who you think I am. I have more money than anyone here could dream of, and I've been hiding it just to see who would stay." But the words stuck in his chest. Instead, he shook his head and whispered, "One day, Ada. I promise, one day you'll know everything." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, though her eyes carried questions she didn't voice. That night, as rain poured hard against the compound roofs, Chaik lay awake once more. He knew the storm was coming, not the kind that fell from the sky, but the kind that broke secrets wide open. And when it came, the world he had built in that small compound, the fragile love he had found, and the masks everyone wore would all be torn away. And though he feared it deeply, another part of him longed for it, because only then would he truly know who would stay and who would walk away. The rain had passed, leaving the compound damp and smelling of wet earth. Puddles gathered in uneven corners, and children splashed through them, laughing in ways only children could. But beneath the laughter, there was a tension in the air, an invisible thread winding tighter each day. Chaik felt it everywhere: eyes that lingered too long on him, whispers that fell silent whenever he walked by, questions disguised as jokes. The rumor that he was not who he seemed was spreading faster than smoke, and no amount of silence could stop it. One morning, he caught Kunal, the car wash worker, staring at him strangely. Kunal was with two of his friends, and though they pretended to talk about football, their eyes kept cutting toward Chaik. Later that day, Sade cornered him near the gate, her lips curled into a sly smile. "You know, Chaik, people are talking. They say you're hiding something. Maybe you're not as poor as you look." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "If that's true, you better not forget those of us who showed you attention early." Chaik gave her no answer, only walked past quietly, but inside his chest, his heart pounded. The walls of his secret were cracking, and once the truth burst out, everything he had built here would be tested. Meanwhile, his bond with Ada only deepened. Every evening at her stall became his refuge from the storm building around him. She had no idea of the whispers swirling, or maybe she chose not to care. With her, life felt simple, honest. They spoke about little things, dreams she had buried, memories of his childhood he carefully edited, fears they both carried but rarely voiced. Sometimes they sat in silence, just listening to the fire crackle, and even that silence felt like music. One evening, when the compound was noisy with a birthday celebration, Ada invited Chaik to join her and her siblings for dinner instead. Their meal was simple yam porridge that was more watery than thick, but the warmth of their laughter made it richer than any feast. Emeka, her younger brother, told jokes that had everyone holding their stomachs, while her sister sang softly as she washed plates. Chaik found himself smiling more than he had in years. In that cramped room, with flickering lantern light, he felt something money had never given him: belonging. But joy often came with its shadow. That very night, after he left Ada's home, he overheard Kunal whispering to BC under the mango tree. "I'm telling you, that guy isn't normal. Look at how he carries himself. Poor people don't walk like that. Poor people don't talk like that. He's hiding something big." BC murmured back, "If it's true, then we need to be careful. He might be using us all." The words cut deep. Chaik wanted to shout that he wasn't using anyone, that he only wanted to know the truth about people. But he bit his tongue and walked away. That was the price of his experiment, the suspicion, the mistrust, the endless weight of hiding. Days turned into weeks, and the rumors refused to die. Mema Uche, the landlady, grew bolder in her questions. One morning, while he was sweeping the yard, she called out loudly enough for the entire compound to hear, "Chaik, are you sure you're paying the right rent? People are saying you can afford more than this small room. Maybe I should increase your rent since you're pretending." The compound erupted in laughter, though some laughed more out of nervousness than humor. Ada frowned deeply and stood up from her stall. "Mama, that's unfair. He pays on time like everyone else. Why treat him like that?" Her defense silenced the laughter, but the damage had already been done. Chaik kept sweeping, his face calm, but inside, shame and gratitude battled fiercely. Gratitude for Ada, shame for the lie he was still living. Not long after, a new test came. Emeka fell sick. His fever burned through the night, leaving him weak and trembling. Ada spent her savings rushing him to the local clinic, only to be told the bill was too much. That evening, she sat on the bench outside her stall, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. Chaik sat beside her, his chest tight. She whispered, "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing them. I try so hard, but life keeps demanding more than I can give." He wanted to scream that he could fix it in a heartbeat, that he had the power to move mountains for her. But again, he stayed silent. Instead, he took her hand gently and said, "You're not failing them. You're stronger than you think." She leaned against him, tears slipping down her cheeks, and he let her cry, each tear burning his soul. That night, when he finally lay on his mattress, he couldn't sleep. His secret was no longer just a test of others, it was becoming a prison for himself. Things escalated one Saturday evening. A group of young men from the compound gathered outside, arguing over a missing phone. Somehow, the blame fell on Chaik. One of them shouted, "He's always too quiet. Who knows what he's hiding?" Another added, "He pretends to be broke, but maybe he's stealing from us." The crowd grew heated, voices overlapping, until finally Ada stepped forward. "Enough," she shouted, her voice sharp as a blade. The compound fell silent. She turned to them, fire in her eyes. "How dare you accuse someone without proof? Chaik has never wronged anyone here. You gossip, you mock, but when he minds his business, you still attack him. If he were truly guilty of anything, I would know. Leave him alone." Her words silenced them, but the damage to Chaik's heart was irreversible. He realized that Ada was carrying a weight she didn't deserve, defending a man she didn't fully know. The guilt tore at him. That night, as he sat alone under the mango tree, his thoughts circled endlessly. He remembered his father's words again, "Wealth will show you masks. Only when you take it away will you see who people really are." He had taken it away, yes, but now he feared he had gone too far. The people who mocked him revealed their true hearts, but the woman who defended him, who gave him her trust, was the one he might end up hurting the most when the truth finally spilled. And spill it would. Because as much as he tried to remain hidden, the world outside the compound was closing in. The driver who had recognized him at the market had spoken to others, and whispers were already traveling faster than he could stop. Sooner or later, someone would walk into this compound and expose him. Chaik sat in the darkness, staring at the faint glow of Ada's lantern from across the yard. He loved her. That much was undeniable. But love without truth was a fragile thing, and his secret was a storm waiting at the gates. The question that haunted him as the night deepened was not whether the truth would come out, but when, and when it did, whether Ada's eyes would still look at him with the same warmth, or with betrayal. The compound slept, but Chaik could not. His heart was a battlefield of fear, hope, and love, each fighting to claim him, each promising a different ending. And in that battle, the night whispered only one truth: nothing would ever be the same again. The days after that night under the mango tree felt heavier. Chaik moved through the compound like a shadow, quiet but alert, as if every conversation and every glance carried the weight of suspicion. Even the air seemed thicker somehow, each breath pulled slow and careful. People started noticing him less, but the gossip had not died. It only shifted to something sharper, something closer to curiosity mixed with distrust. Ada noticed it too. She had begun to see the way people looked at him, sometimes with doubt, other times with open judgment. She asked him once, quietly, when they were alone at her stall after closing, "Chaik, do you feel it? That they don't trust you anymore?" He hesitated, staring down at the roasted corn she had laid out beside him. His silence said more than any words. Finally, he whispered, "They don't see me. They see a story they want to tell." Her hand touched his briefly, soft and warm, a gesture that rooted him in the moment. She didn't press further. She seemed to understand without asking questions, but that understanding only deepened the complexity of what he was hiding. That evening, Mama Uche knocked on his door. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and something else that unsettled him. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and sat on the worn chair opposite him. "You've been here a while now," she said slowly, "and I hear more things about you every day. People talk. I talk. But maybe I've been wrong about you. Maybe you're just here to prove something to yourself. Or maybe," she trailed off, her eyes sharp on his face, "you're hiding something bigger than just pride." Chaik looked at her quietly. The words hung heavy between them. Mema Uche was older, tougher than most, but in that moment she felt like the first person who saw beyond his mask. Before he could answer, Ada called from outside, signaling the end of her evening shift. Mema Uche rose slowly, her gaze fixed on him a little longer than necessary, then left without another word. Chaik stayed on his mattress that night, wondering what Mema Uche had really meant. The next morning brought another challenge. A young man named Tunde, who worked in a nearby shop, confronted Chaik at the well. He had been watching him closely for weeks. "People say you're hiding money," Tunde said bluntly, his voice low but certain. "I see how you live differently, how you carry yourself. Why lie? Just tell us the truth." Chaik didn't answer right away. He looked at the clear water shimmering in the bucket at his feet, the sound of children laughing somewhere nearby, and then into Tunde's eyes. "Why do you care what I have or don't have?" he asked softly. Tunde shrugged, but his eyes never left Chaik's. "Because it changes things. If you're not who you say you are, then everything you've done here, everything you've given, every smile means something different." Chaik walked away without saying another word. Tunde's words echoed in his mind the rest of the day. Every smile he gave, every hand he extended in friendship, suddenly felt like it was being weighed on an invisible scale. The tension in the compound began to rise. People gathered in clusters, speaking quietly when Chaik passed, their expressions shifting between curiosity and something darker. Sade's words began to sound like more than jealousy, they became part of the growing suspicion that surrounded him. One afternoon, she even went so far as to confront Ada. "You really trust him?" Sade asked, leaning casually against Ada's stall while pretending to inspect the corn. "People talk. They say he has money but pretends to be poor. I just think you should be careful." Ada looked at her calmly, brushing away the comment as if it didn't matter. "Let people talk," she said. "Chaik is his own man. That's enough for me." But Chaik knew it wasn't enough. He knew suspicion was a seed that would grow if not rooted out. That night, he stayed awake longer than usual. The compound was quiet, except for the occasional creak of doors and a far-off sound of laughter. He walked to Ada's stall, where she was closing for the night, and stood beside her silently for a while. She glanced up, smiling softly despite the fatigue in her eyes. "Why are you here so late?" she asked. "I wanted to see you," he said simply. She tilted her head toward him. "You've been quiet lately." "I have things I need to figure out," he admitted. "Things I can't tell you yet." She didn't press him. Instead, she offered him the half-roasted corn she had set aside. He took it without speaking, chewing slowly while the silence between them stretched, not empty but heavy with unspoken thoughts. The following days brought a subtle shift in how people treated him. Some avoided him outright, their suspicion turning to coldness. Others, curious or emboldened, began testing him, asking pointed questions, making veiled comments in his presence. Chaik endured it quietly, but inside, the pressure built like a rising tide he could no longer hold back. One afternoon, Emeka came running to him in the yard, tears streaking his dirt-smudged face. "I broke my schoolbook," he said between sobs. "I can't pay for another. Mama Ada is trying," but his voice broke. Chaik felt something inside him snap. He rose without thinking, pulling Emeka aside. "Where's the money for it?" he asked quietly. Emeka shook his head. "I don't have it." Mama Ada tried, but she couldn't. Chaik reached into his pocket. His fingers touched the worn edges of coins and notes he had been saving. But tonight, they would not be enough. He could give the boy far more than he needed, but giving it now meant breaking the rules he had set for himself. He pulled back, handing him what little he had, though his chest ached with guilt. Ada watched from her stall, her eyes catching his for a moment before she looked away. That night, Chaik sat under the same mango tree where he had sat weeks ago, feeling the weight of his secret press heavier than ever. He wondered how long he could hold on to it. How long before it destroyed the trust Ada had placed in him. And in that quiet darkness, he began to understand something terrifying. It wasn't the truth being kept that scared him the most. It was the fear that, when it came out, Ada might not see him the same way again. The following morning, a commotion at the gate pulled everyone outside. A car had pulled up, sleek and polished, the kind of car that turned heads instantly. From it stepped a man in a tailored suit, his eyes scanning the compound until they landed on Chaik. There was a pause, a weightless moment that seemed to freeze everything. The man approached Chaik slowly. "You don't know me, but I know you," he said quietly, his voice firm. "We need to talk." Chaik's heart stopped. And for the first time, he realized the storm was no longer coming. It was already here. The sudden arrival of the suited man threw the compound into chaos. Children stopped playing. Women at stalls froze mid-motion, their conversations dying in the air. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Chaik felt his chest tighten, the weight of every secret, every choice, every lie he had built pressing down on him like a physical force. The man stepped closer, his polished shoes crunching on the dust of the yard. His presence carried authority, something in his movement made the air around him sharp. He stopped a few steps in front of Chaik and studied him quietly, like a sculptor examining a rough block of stone before the first strike. "You don't know me, but I know you," he repeated, his voice low but steady. "And I'm here because you've been hiding. Not from everyone, but from the one truth you can't keep from yourself." Chaik swallowed hard. The words stung, but they also unsettled something deep inside him. He glanced toward Ada, who was watching from her stall, her eyes wide and questioning, but she did not move. Kunal and Sade were at the gate now, whispers already rippling through the crowd gathering behind them. The suited man looked past Chaik, scanning the yard. "I came here to stop this," he said. "But now I see you've started something far bigger. You've built something real. And you're about to lose it." Ada stepped forward suddenly, her voice firm. "Who are you to talk to him like that?" she said, her hands clenched at her sides. Her gaze shifted to Chaik, full of worry. "Chaik, what is going on?" He didn't answer. The suited man gave him a measured look before speaking again. "I'm here to remind you that truth cannot be hidden forever. I know who you are. I know what you've done. And I know why you're here. A hush fell over the compound. Even the air seemed heavier, as though waiting for something important to break. Ada took a step closer to Chaik, her voice trembling now. Tell me what's going on. Chaik closed his eyes for a long moment, breathing slowly. Every instinct screamed at him to stay silent, but the weight of the suited man's presence, of the gazes of everyone around him, pressed him toward something he had been avoiding for so long, truth. Finally, he spoke. I am not what you think I am, he said softly. His voice carried across the quiet yard. I came here to see what people would do if they thought I had nothing. To see who would stand by me when I was stripped bare. And I didn't expect what I found. Gasps rose from the crowd. Ada's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth. Connell exchanged a look with Sade, their faces unreadable. The suited man nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated this confession. Chaik's voice grew stronger, but there was pain in it. I am a billionaire. Not here for money, not for fame. But to find truth. To know who would see me for me, not my wealth. I wanted to find that answer, and I found it, in the most unexpected place. Ada stepped toward him, her face a mixture of shock and something deeper, hurt. So everything you told me was a lie, she asked quietly. It wasn't a lie, Chaik said gently. It was the truth I wanted to test. I wanted to see if kindness was real when wealth was stripped away. His eyes searched hers. Ada, I never wanted to hurt you. I wanted to understand something I couldn't see from the top of a tower. The silence that followed was heavy. Around them, the compound was quiet, the people frozen as if holding their breath. Then Mama Uche spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. So, you came here to play with our lives. To use us for your own experiment. Chaik looked down. I see it now. What I did was selfish. I thought I was seeking truth, but I didn't realize the cost. I've tested you all without your knowing. And for that, I'm sorry. The suited man cleared his throat. He is right. The truth must come out. But what you do next will decide everything. He turned to the crowd. You have seen who he is. Now decide who you are. Ada's eyes never left Chaik's. There was pain there, but also something like compassion, as if she was trying to reach inside him and pull him free of the experiment that had consumed him. Why me? She asked finally. Because you stood by me without knowing what I was, he said quietly. Because when others doubted, you believed. Even when I gave you nothing but my presence, you gave me your trust. Her voice cracked. And now I'm supposed to decide if that trust was worth it. He didn't answer right away. Around them, the crowd shifted, murmuring quietly. Connell looked conflicted. Sade smiled faintly, as if her suspicions had been confirmed. Mema Uche shook her head, her face a mix of disappointment and understanding. The suited man stepped closer to Chaik. It's time to end this. The truth has been laid bare. Now, what matters is what you do with it. Chaik's gaze lingered on Ada. The night air felt heavier now, filled with the weight of unspoken words. He knew he could reveal more, tell her everything, but he also knew that some truths were not easy to take. Ada looked at him long and hard, her eyes searching for something deeper. Finally, she said quietly, you wanted to see who would stay. But the real question now is, who will you let stay? The suited man glanced at her, then back at Chaik. There is no going back now, he said. This is the moment your life changes forever. Chaik nodded slowly. His heart was pounding, but there was resolve in his eyes. He turned to the crowd and spoke so they could all hear. I came here to learn the truth about people. What I found was more than I expected. But now, it is time I learned the truth about myself. The crowd fell silent again, each person holding their breath, waiting for what he would say next. Chaik looked back at Ada. Ada, stay if you want. Walk away if you must. But whatever you decide, I will respect it. Because in the end, truth isn't just about what is hidden. It's about what you choose to keep. The night hung still around them. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. Somewhere closer, someone whispered. The compound held its breath as Ada stepped forward, her hand trembling, her eyes locked on Chike's. And in that moment, everything they had known until now shifted into something unknown. The silence stretched long after Chike's words. Even the cicadas seemed to pause, the warm night air holding its breath. The compound was still, the people frozen in their own thoughts, wondering what would happen next. Ada stood there, her hand just inches from his, her heart beating loud enough for him to hear. She seemed torn, as though the weight of years and hope and trust was pressing her down. Chike held his breath too. Every second felt heavier than the last. His chest ached, not from fear, but from the knowledge that the moment he spoke next would change everything. Finally, Ada stepped forward. Not quickly, but slowly, as if she was making herself certain of each step. She stopped in front of him, her hand brushing lightly against his. The crowd shifted softly, a wave of murmurs beginning to rise. "I stayed for you," she said softly, almost more to herself than to him. Her eyes were glistening now, and Chike felt a lump in his throat. "Not for your money. Not for your secrets. For you." There was something in her voice that broke through the walls Chike had built around himself. Something pure and unwavering. His eyes locked on hers, and for a moment, the world fell away, the compound, the murmurs, the suited man at the edge of the yard, it all became noise. He reached out and took her hand fully this time, holding it gently but firmly. "Ada, I don't deserve this," he said quietly. "I came here pretending to be poor to test everyone. But I see now, it was never about testing them. It was about testing myself. And I was wrong to do it this way. You deserved honesty, not this game." Ada didn't speak right away. She simply held his hand, letting the words sink in. Around them, people started to stir, some nodding softly, others exchanging looks of relief or disbelief. Even Sade, standing near the gate, crossed her arms quietly, not speaking but watching closely. Chike turned to face the entire crowd, his voice strong now. "You've all given me something I never expected. Trust. Friendship. Love. And even though I came here to find out who would stay, I realize now, it was never about who stayed. It was about who was willing to see beyond what I had or didn't have. And that is priceless." The suited man stepped forward, removing his jacket and loosening his tie as if the formality of the moment no longer mattered. "Chike, it's time," he said simply. "Whatever you were running from, it's over." Chike nodded slowly, his gaze shifting back to Ada. "Ada, will you let me stay? Not as a man testing hearts, but as myself." Ada looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes softened, and she nodded. "If you're willing to be honest, I will." He smiled, a quiet but deep smile, and she smiled back. Around them, the compound seemed to exhale, releasing weeks of tension in a collective sigh. Mema Uche stepped forward, her voice surprisingly warm. "You both have a long road ahead," she said, "but perhaps you've already started walking it together." Chike turned back to the crowd. "I will stay," he said, his voice carrying clearly to everyone. "Not because I'm testing anyone, but because this is where I've found something worth more than everything I had before. And that is people who care without conditions." There was a shift then, a ripple of emotions passing through the crowd, some nodding, others wiping tears quietly. Children started laughing again, breaking the silence, and the compound slowly returned to life, but now with something changed, something unspoken but deeply felt. Sade approached Ada quietly, her voice low. "Maybe I was wrong about him," she said. Ada glanced at her without answering, squeezing Chike's hand instead. Chike looked up at the moon shining over the compound. It felt brighter tonight, as if the stars themselves were smiling down on them. He knew nothing would ever be the same. The experiment was over, but the life that followed would be something entirely new. In the days that came, the compound became a place of stories. People talked about Chike's truth, about Ada's choice, about the man who came in silence and left in honesty. And through it all, Chaik stayed, not as the billionaire hiding his fortune, but as a man who had learned the weight and worth of truth. Ada and Chaik began to build something together, quietly but deeply. They worked side by side at her stall, sharing laughter and simple moments of peace. The compound watched, sometimes whispering, sometimes smiling, but always watching the change in him. And in that quiet transformation, Chaik realized something he had never expected to find when he came to the village: that truth was not something to test, but something to live. On a warm morning, Ada looked at him as they arranged roasted corn at her stall. "Why did you come here?" she asked softly. He smiled, eyes meeting hers. "I wanted to see who would stay. But I found something better. I found myself." And in the simple honesty of that moment, the whole village seemed to lean in, listening not for a story, but for a truth worth living. Thank you for following this story all the way through. This journey wasn't just about wealth or secrets, it was about truth, trust, and what truly matters in life. Remember, every choice we make shapes the story we live. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next story. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments the country you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your voice matters, and we want to connect with every corner of the world.